You know, there's an issue which everyone's been talking about, and today it seems to have an extra amount of urgency because the police are talking about this gruesome rape that has taken place of this 5-year-old. Now, what's concerning people is that the police are saying the two accused are watching pornography on their cell phones, and they seem to believe that it would have triggered them. That was one of the factors triggering them to go out, look for this child who was, obviously she's a neighbor, she was an easy victim, and then cause it. Now, as someone, you must have been, you're on Twitter as well, Milind, as someone who's, you know, kind of deals with these issues of internet pornography keeps coming out, do you think there is a link?
Well, I actually don't have a view on whether someone watching certain material that may be legal in some places but might be obscene to somebody else can trigger a violent streak in someone. I don't have personal evidence to suggest that. But I think since we're on the topic of whether pornography can lead to violence and atrocities against women and children, we in the Ministry of Communications and IT, if the government decides to censor it in some ways, we will implement that. We'll have to find ways to do that with the internet, with technologies, etc. But in terms of a larger debate in India on whether pornography leads to violence,
yes,
I don't think anyone should have a knee-jerk reaction and just say it does and let's ban it. Because we are a liberal society, we don't want to get into the space of censoring content. And I think that the best people who can answer that are really people like social scientists, psychologists, sociologists, who understand the correlation between watching something like that and it leading to violence.
You know, last week as well, Supreme Court, one of the lawyers, there's a petition now, and the Chief Justice of India is now hearing that petition. And that petition seemed to suggest, and it gave a lot of figures about internet pornography and things like that. They said there's a direct link. Now, they have now given notice to your ministry, to the Ministry of Information Broadcasting. Is that a tricky area to go into, do you think?
Well, not really. I think if the Supreme Court or the judiciary takes a decision and passes an order which we have to follow, the government has to follow, then we'll obviously do that. But I just believe that these kind of things, because again, I go back to my experience when I was a student in the US. And I remember, and even now it happens even of late, whenever there's a gun-related crime in the United States, and especially a young person who's gone out and taken his father's firearms and fired in his school, they always open up a certain debate about whether a certain kind of genre of music is encouraging gun violence.
You mean like rap and things like that?
Maybe back in the day they were seen as gangster rap and things like that. And then whether violent video games are leading to gun related violence and whether they should be banned. Now, as far as I know, they've raised the bar in terms of what age groups can watch those video games, can play those video games. So I think most of the violent video games are only allowed for people who are above the age of 18, who are adults. So that's a decision they've taken. I'm sure they took that decision in consultation with, again, as I said, social scientists. And I think that's how we should move about it, because again, coming back to the larger thing of controlling, censoring content, whether it's on the internet or off the internet, I think what kind of content should be censored, that requires a much larger debate. If somebody is obviously posting content that can inflame, create anger between communities, can
which
cause
has
communal
been a tricky
violence.
Area for the government.
Those, I don't think anybody really is, saying let that be online, let that be offline. Generally, there's consensus that should be removed from the internet, and maybe someone should pay a price for having posted that content. But in the area of pornography, what is the correlation between watching pornography and leading to violence? That I think needs to be explored much further. I'm not a social scientist. I'm not in a particular ministry that can pass a judgment on that. But if you ask me my personal opinion, I do think we have to find ways, given the fact that it's so prevalent on the internet, to maybe keep it away from children. So children shouldn't perhaps have access to, should definitely not have access to pornographic material. Now, how do you do that on the internet? I'm sure we can find ways to improve technologies. But that's really the area that I would say as a personal level, perhaps needs to be regulated. The larger scope of does pornography lead to violence, I think requires much larger debate from experts.
Is it possible to regulate the internet and for the government to do that?
Well, it is difficult. There are proxy servers, and there are ways of going beyond that. And even if a country has domestic regulation, the internet is still largely a global medium and a global platform where people can access information, share information. But perhaps I think, Sunitra, we need some consensus as a society in terms of, does pornographic material firstly cause violence? Once we establish that it does or it doesn't, then we can find out ways and methods of, curbing it or controlling it.
Your government actually, got a lot of flack. I was reading up on that, and a lot of people felt that, when one instance is this popular thing which some people developed called Savita Bhabhi, which was an Indian pornographic comic material, and the MHA went ahead and banned it. And some people felt, why is that? Why should that happen? If consumption of it is not banned in India, why should that happen?
Well, as I said, I'm not in a position I'm not in the ministry that decides what to ban and what not to ban. We in the Ministry of IT and Communications often get flack for deciding what to ban, but we actually never decide something should be banned. We only follow orders from different ministries.
Okay, so the MHA will decide that.
And we provide technological inputs to different ministries.
Yes.
But personally, I believe that all content, whether it's a book that is perhaps talking about a leader that's revered by thousands and millions of people in India, whether it's a controversial form of art. I think that we in India tend to censor things sometimes with a knee-jerk reaction. And we tend to just say, this seems to be bad, let me ban it. And we often do that without consulting important stakeholders in the process. So if it's something that can cause violence, that can cause communal tension, it's important to consult important people in the law and order department, perhaps ex-bureaucrats. If it's something in this area of pornography, it's important to consult social scientists, psychologists. They need to actually tell the government whether banning pornographic material is the solution, or whether improving, getting people to debate this issue, sex education in their homes, in their families, is the solution. Personally, my personal view is I would tilt on the latter. I would say that the government can do only so much. The government can initiate important legislations. In the case of after Nirbhaya's case, we did do that in record time. The police have to, of course, enforce it, be more responsive, be more accessible. The judiciary, of course, has its work cut out for itself, has to deliver justice as soon as possible, try an accused as quickly as possible. But I think one thing that we don't seem to be talking about is what are we as individuals and what are we as a society doing within our own homes? What are we doing within our own families?
You mean to change the mindset of
To change mindsets, to change mindsets in our workplaces. I often hear in New Delhi, because I come from Mumbai, I often hear the debate of, there's different, it's a confluence of different people from different parts of the country, and there's a moving population, and that leads to people living in shanties and other things that causes this. But I still believe the crux of the problem really comes down to what are we doing within our own homes, within our own families. And again, coming back to the analogy of the US, whenever this debate happens with gun control, today in the United States, you're looking at a debate where they're actually looking at banning guns altogether. After
Although
a
they
recent
seem very
incident.
far from doing
But
that.
perhaps, but I fundamentally believe that, of course, you should curb how accessible firearms are in the market. But in the end, it ultimately comes down to what you're doing within your families and your homes.